Wheeler, co-host today of, we're running in real time, right?
Yeah.
Not a co-host. I'm used to being a co-host on another show, but I'm the sole host today of Democratic Dialogue. And our guest today, David Gauthier, is over here on my left. David has led a charmed life. He's never met me before. But I'm
Until today.
Until today.
Right.
Until today. Let me know about what you do. We've discussed just a little bit some of
Sure.
the enterprises in terms of podcasts and video and so forth you're doing. We're going to talk today about public access and its importance to community building and being up to date on what's going on in the world. But what's your organization and what do you do in it?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, Mike. It's great to be here. I've been in community media for about 25 years, I think, now. I've held almost all the jobs that one can have in this field. And currently I'm running the station. I'm the executive director in Winchester, Massachusetts, so not too far away from here. Mm-hmm. I'm a Salem resident and have been my whole life. I sort of cut my teeth, I guess, in the business at Salem Access TV. So there I did a lot of programming and production and training and those kinds of things. So I've been in this business for quite some time. And I'm also, with the time left over, I'm the president of Mass Access, which is a advocacy agency that's statewide and sort of vies for the rights of community media stations across the Commonwealth. So we're our membership organization. So stations like 1623 can be members of Mass Access, and they enjoy the benefits that we offer. And a lot of that has to do with sharing resources, sharing ideas, and just getting to know the other neighboring stations, what they're doing, best practices, those sorts of things. So that's it in a nutshell.
Well, we want to dig into it and talk particularly about where this originated. The show here, the Democratic Dialogue, was started the better part of 20 years ago. And Catherine Bayless gets a tip of the hat on that. New show every month. Sometimes we're talking to candidates, sometimes talking about advocates for various issues. I play the old-timer card a little bit. I'm a Gloucester guy, and in the early 1950s, I had a paper route in my neighborhood. Gloucester Times was a vibrant paper at that point, a lot of good reporting. There'd be somebody at the school committee meeting, obviously somebody at city council meeting, there'd be neighborhood reports. I would buy the paper for 3 cents and sell it for 5 cents, and it was a wash in cash as a consequence. And now the paper is still doing the best it can with limited resources and with less advertising money coming in and so forth. So where did community access start from? And I have only the barest of knowledge about what the FCC requirements are when things work. So where do we live in both the economic and in the regulatory world?
So the short story about the history is that, when cable first became the it technology, and that was way before we had cell phones in our pockets and, the internet and YouTube and all these things. Some forward-thinking people thought, wouldn't it be a good idea if everyone was able to take advantage of the technology that is now available? Everybody's sort of interconnected through these cables. So federal law was passed saying that when a company comes into a city like Gloucester and wants to use public rights of way in order to sell their product, they need to give back to that community in the form of, franchise-related costs. So they pay for using public land, telephone poles, and those kinds of things.
And also, in many cases, for a monopoly, basically.
Well, in some, and I don't know, in Gloucester, you have only one provider? Or?
Yes, and I'm looking over your shoulder to City Hall. I was on the initial cable selection committee, and it incorporated not just Gloucester, but Rockport, economies of scale, and so forth. But at least at that time, it was going to be one bidder who won, and we were looking at what they did, and they would compete in part by the package that they would offer. Some of it voluntary, some by regulatory fiat.
Yeah. That's an interesting thing about Massachusetts is that the Commonwealth is one of only about a half a dozen states in the Union who have local franchising. So Gloucester goes out and negotiates a contract with Comcast. Salem, where I live, does the same thing. They negotiate with Comcast. Winchester, where I work, there are two providers. So Winchester, goes through every 5 to 10 years and renegotiates contracts with both Comcast and Verizon because they have two providers down there. So it is a little different.
Is the community access part of that negotiation then?
Typically, yes. If the community media station is doing a good job, then the cable advisory board, those city and town boards are going to vie for those rights, try to get them as much as they can in negotiations, and that's an important thing. A community media station or municipality can argue for up to 5% of gross annual revenues that the cable company makes in that particular municipality. And again, these are different state to state. Some of them have statewide franchising where the percentage of that gross annual revenue is set, and then everyone in the state gets that. Some other states do it on a regional basis too. So sort of like the model here at 1623.
So you mentioned part of what your organization does, this is mass
access, yes.
Mass access, is get best practices so communities can learn from one another. We were in it early, and there are plenty of shows beyond our democratic dialogue and so forth. But as you look at different communities throughout the state, what do you see right now as innovative and interesting that maybe we in Gloucester and Rockport, I should say, ought to consider?
Well, I really like what 1623 is doing. And that's a beautiful thing about the individual local franchising here in Massachusetts, is that different municipalities can decide the way they want to present themselves. Now, I don't want to assume anything, but I feel as though 1623 has made a conscious decision to up their production value and really make high quality staff produced content, as well as still doing the traditional values of bringing in members. We have some members here that are helping us here today, bringing in members, teaching them how to access all of this technology and harness it to express themselves. So I think that's a wonderful thing. Different stations are doing a lot of local news. We talked about that, the deserts, the media deserts, that print media drying up is leaving. Now, community media is filling that void a lot of times. A lot of cities and towns have their own news programs, sometimes on a daily basis.
Wow.
So there's a lot of municipal coverage because I think we find that to be very valuable to the audiences. We talked a bit about podcasting and using just audio to reach different audiences. I know we did a staff produced one for a couple of years down in Winchester, and it was very, very successful. So,
can we back up a couple of paragraphs?
Yeah.
When you talk about daily news shows in some communities, Gloucester is 30,000, maybe wrong in this, Rockport I think is a hair under 10, something of that sort. Are there communities that size who have daily news shows?
Yeah, there are, obviously, when you get into the smaller municipalities, just do the math. Even if you're getting 5% of the gross annual revenue from that small town, that's not going to add up to a whole lot. So you have to think a lot about how you responsibly expend those resources that you do have. If you have a daily news program, you're probably going to have a news director, and you have to have staff that's producing constantly. But there are a few that have made that sort of their priority. And again, that speaks to that individuality that we have here.
You mentioned the kind of a news desert because local papers may be very well intended, but their revenues are down substantially. I want to hear a good argument, a counter argument. Any of the conventional press argue that this is unfair competition, that they're losing readership? I hope that's not the case, and you can show it because of community access on TV.
I haven't heard that. I think if you're doing it right, you're working with the local print media. You can really enhance each other's product by working together. Even the print media now, there's a big push in online content, and it's not just print. Sometimes they want photos, they want video. If you're sharing resources, you're basically serving the same folks, right?
In an
It's the
enhanced
same
way.
audience,
Right.
right? So I haven't heard where I think it's competition. I think if you're doing it right, you're sort of working together on that.
That was my intuition, but I wanted
Yeah.
testimony from somebody who is actually in this.
Yeah, I haven't heard it, but I suppose it's possible.
But what do we have? 350 plus cities and towns in Massachusetts, and Gloucester is its own little island. A lot of self-identity and pride, a lot of factions too, and so forth. People with long memories. I'm one of them. I'm wondering whether we're a little bit of a peculiar community in the sense of this shows my parochialism, but some suburbs that are less distinctive. They may feel that I'm slighting them if you're Natick and next to Wellesley and so forth. Maybe there's a difference, but it's not as marked as Gloucester is from either of those communities. So I'm wondering whether Gloucester is sort of a special case that we were in this early, and you have the arts, you have sports and so forth on that.
I think that's a really important charge of any community media center is being entrenched in that community and understanding what it is that those residents are looking for, what matters to the residents. Because the way that I run a station in Winchester may not work for running a station in Gloucester or running a station in Rockport or running a station in Pittsfield, right? So I think you have to, if you're running one of these stations, you have to get out there, speak to the people, understand what it is that they're looking for, what it is that makes them unique. And how can you best serve them? That's how you're going to survive in the future. If you make yourself an invaluable part of the community that you're serving, that's your best hope for survival, I think.
When we were talking just before the camera flipped on, you mentioned that there are some communities that lost their papers some time ago, and it's a barren desert there in terms of not just news, but a sense of togetherness and so forth. So in some sense, they may have forgotten what they're missing, without naming names, which obviously you wouldn't want to do. But that must be a challenge to rebuild that sense of commitment to the community.
Yeah, I think it is, Michael, and it's an interesting aspect because I think number one, it's an accessibility issue.
In what sense?
Well, there are people that can't get to municipal meetings, whether they may have a physical problem, or they may just not have a schedule that's convenient to get to these meetings. So we're filling a void there and allowing people to be part of their local government. If that goes away, how does one participate? How does one become a knowledgeable voter? You think about all the content that goes around as far as elections go, and local hot topics. I know right now they're rebuilding an NBTA station in Winchester, and there seem to be endless meetings about it. Right?
Yeah.
You can imagine, right? Right in the middle of downtown, historic downtown.
Yeah.
So everyone is up in arms. The business community is upset. Some of the residents are upset, and there are people who maybe I just don't like the way it looks in the plans, right?
Yeah.
So how do people stay involved? Well, if you can't get to that meeting, you have to make sure that someone's there with a video camera so you can participate after the fact. I think
We
that's
may have
really
a breaking
important.
story coming
Yes,
around.
I love this part. This is what we do, right?
This is you'll come into the camera view, fire a truck coming down from the station.
You don't often see that on Channel 5 or Channel 7.
through the truck,
right?
and we may have more to follow. But we were talking about this sense of public access. At first I thought you meant in terms of the media, but you meant, I'm again looking at City Hall here, people who can make it up the stairs to go to a council meeting or a committee meeting or something of that sort.
Well, one thing that I've found, and part of what we do at Mass Access is we try to pass legislation that is friendly toward community media. Just recently, we had introduced a bill with the help of Representative Paul McMurtry. He's down in Westwood. And he introduced a bill that would follow the model of cable, but stretch it further to streaming entertainment companies like Hulu and Netflix and those kinds of things. As you understand, younger folks especially, and a lot of even older folks, because it's less expensive, are cutting the cord to cable. So they're going away from cable, they're getting their entertainment from these streaming companies. Well, the streaming companies aren't paying for the use of public
I was going to
rights
say,
of way.
yes, right.
They do not. So they are not contributing to their local economies. They're not contributing anything. They're not giving back to their consumers. So we would like to see Massachusetts pass some law that would require that, very similarly to the way that the cable model works.
Without getting deeply into the weeds, how would you do that? If I, as an entrepreneur, wanted to create some kind of platform that was about Cape Ann, under this legislation, I would have to pay some portion of what?
We were cognizant of that when we wrote the bill, and we put a cap on it. So if you are making over a certain amount of money on your streaming, so what we didn't want to do was tax ourselves, right? It's because many of the community media stations are streaming content all over the place. So we didn't want ourselves to be caught in this net, right? So we said if it's over a certain amount of money, and forgive me, I don't even remember what that figure was, but an entrepreneur should be able to reach a small enough audience here in Cape Ann and make a little money off on, but not have to pay a huge amount. And we're talking about 5% on revenue too. So if someone was making a little money, it wouldn't be a huge amount to give back.
But when you say streaming, this is something that I could get on a pretty good, iPhone or Android phone or something of that sort. In that regard.
So a lot of people are moving to that form of entertainment, and the only thing that pays the bill for community media is cable at this point. Satellite TV doesn't carry these signals, so they don't pay. Although there is a tax in place in Massachusetts, so the direct TVs of the world are paying a little bit. Community media doesn't see that money, but we think that eventually, and this is happening in about a dozen other states across the country, that there are, it's tied to sales tax for the most part. So we're not reinventing the wheel here. People are starting to see that, well, these companies are sort of getting off scot-free. They're not giving anything back, They're making tons of money, and it's just growing all the time, but they're not giving anything back. So I think eventually Massachusetts will pass something. What we were trying to do as Mass Access was to be in there on the ground floor in the conversation and say, this is a good solution for us. Because if we take this pie, say, this pie that we're collecting here, with that 5% of gross annual revenues, you give 40% to the municipality, you give 40% to the media center, and 20% can stay with the state. Everyone is happy with that, and everyone is making a little money, unencumbered state funding. So
we go back to money. Cameras cost money. The technology, people to help oversee all of this cost money. And without some kind of revenue source, all the good intentions of the world aren't going to do the community building that you're interested in.
And that's what we're looking at. The Massachusetts community media centers have seen about a 7% decrease in funding over the last couple of years. And that has to do with a lot of different factors. Comcast especially is infamous for the way that they're doing accounting now, and there's a national movement to try to reverse some of those practices that they're doing.
Maybe it has some of the old Adelphia DNA
I'm not really sure what they're doing.
They got in trouble on a variety of things.
Well, those things go beyond me. The way that they're allowed to package it and then present it in a different way. But a lot of that does have to do with the cord cutting, and that's the term that we use for folks who go away from cable, in favor of other streaming type of services or online services. So that revenue is going down. That revenue will only continue to go down. We talked a little bit about the FCC and the order that they passed. Now, it's a whole ball of wax, but what they basically did was say that there are certain things that we can define as cable, as in-kind donations. So if you're getting free cable drops in City Hall, if Comcast is coming in and building a fiber infrastructure for you to send signals across town, they shouldn't, they should be able to take that away. They should be able to, say that that's an in-kind cost, and we're going to take that away from that 5%.
I see.
That's what they've done.
Yeah. They, in this case, being the media companies, I shouldn't say media, but the Comcast of the world.
Well, it was the FCC's order.
Yeah.
Ajit Pai, who's the chair, he is, a former cable executive. So let's call it what it is. He was doing a favor for his friends,
right.
And they passed this order. So, there's obviously there's some, big objections to this, but you add, right now we haven't seen a ton of deductions due to the FCC's order. We were worried about it, went into place on September 1st of 19.
I remember the attention that was given to this when it was under discussion. So it's more complicated, and it's more important that we understand that. Let me replay, and then you can correct, you get partial credit on this.
Sure.
So part of the argument for support, we can worry about the support, but support for public access is our hometown papers, and sometimes our regional papers have dried up. I'm so happy the Gloucester Times is a going concern, or at least appears to be, but they just don't have the resources to be what they used to be. So then the question is, how do you create a sense of community, share information and so forth, give access to people for whom trudging the stairs in City Hall just is too hard, and it's at night and all of that. These other media, whether it is streaming media or whether it's through cable and so forth, can fill that void and also provide an experience that's different from reading something in print. So that's all to the good. Now, what you've taught me a little bit is where the money comes from, and that Massachusetts is a little bit different in that communities are negotiating their own packages, and part of the package is a commitment to local access.
Yep.
And some communities are further along in figuring out how to organize that and what the priorities ought to be.
Absolutely.
What do we need to underscore in all of that in not only how people understand kind of what the system is, and I think we've gotten there, but is there anything our viewers can do to help support the enterprise and make it even more vibrant?
Well, I think at this point, we're not seeing a ton of deductions. Again, a 7% difference on an annual budget that might be 300 or 400,000 isn't going to kill you.
Yeah.
But a little more action out there. But start adding these things together. We talk about the cord cutting and the deductions we've seen there.
Right.
We talk about the FCC's order and the deductions that we'll see there. All of these things sort of add up together to a little bit of a bleak future. And I wanted to mention too that in my experience, we have a ton of support in the Massachusetts legislature.
Good.
People are, representatives and senators are always saying how much, a lot of them utilize the facilities that, that in the areas they represent. So they're always saying how much they support it. But the problem is, it's never the most vital thing in the world.
Right.
And you hinted at this earlier, and I thought it was poignant because what I fear is that it will never get the attention that it needs until it's gone. And then people will be worried about what they've lost. So we understand that what we're doing is not saving lives, is not, but we are providing, I think, a little bit of a fabric to tie a lot of communities together.
Yeah.
And without that, there isn't as much communication going on within municipalities.
I don't think anybody, forget going back to the 50s, which I did at the top of the show, anybody going back 20 years ago were worried about local newspapers. I think that, but it was on the near horizon in terms of what was going to happen.
And we took it for granted, didn't we?
So this is a little chastening in a way. We could be looking in the same rearview mirror if there isn't real commitment to this.
I think that's absolutely accurate, and that's, as media professionals, we're looking at it now and saying, okay, and we've been talking about this for probably 10 years about, what about future funding? What's going to happen? And you can't tell. No one knows really. The way that our lives go day to day now is so much different from the way it used to be. It's difficult to predict where it's going.
Right.
But I think that there is still a need, is obviously always going to be a need for people to connect, for governments to be open and communicate with their constituents. There's always going to be a need for informing the public. We have a vehicle, and we are hoping that that won't go away.
Well, I used the word parochial before. This is, on our local public access channel and so forth. Interesting to know that you've been working hard at mass access communities throughout the state who are at different stages of development in terms of how they're using what we have at present and how much foresight they have about what's coming down the road. We haven't even gotten out of the Massachusetts, the Commonwealth's borders. There are 49 other states, if I'm counting right. Is there, and I'm watching the clock on this, but is there some sort of association in other states of your counterparts where?
Yes. Yeah, there are many other statewide organizations. Some states are stronger than others, and there are some national organizations that we also partner with, the Alliance for Community Media, or NATOA, which is has a longer the acronym will do for it because it's it's a National Association of Telecommunications, blah blah blah. Goes on and on. So there are some national organizations that we also partner with that are sort of watchdogging things on a national level.
That's terrific. And
it is.
As I think about what you're doing in communities like Gloucester throughout the state and nationally, David Gauthier, thank you so much for joining us.
No problem. We can go on all day.
And for your mission. Well, we could, but the show has to come to a close. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it, Michael.